How's everybody doing? Welcome back or welcome to the channel. As always, I'm Hector the Pepper. Milk. Let's talk about it. Milk, the creamy white substance from a cow's teat. That's what we're talking about today. More specifically, though, the Got Milk campaign, which arguably, depending on who you talk to, could be one of the most useless propaganda campaigns ever created in order to increase milk consumption across America. Now, you're probably wondering, why are we talking about this today? Well, because I want to, and because I really I've always thought, where did this come from and why was it pushed so hard, especially as I've gotten older and I've realized that milk is not really the greatest thing for you. While it's not horrible for you, it's not the greatest thing for you. And research has shown that after about the age of 2, milk's helpful properties drastically decrease to very, very minimal. All right. Now, Got Milk. Some of you watching this might be young and might not remember this ad campaign. Others of you, if you're around my age, and I might be dating myself some, will remember the Got Milk ad campaign. All right. And today we're going to talk about how it wasn't designed to ultimately help everyone's health. It was designed to boost milk sales to help the government make more money. All right. Now, the Got Milk campaign just popped up overnight, it seemed like. All right. And in the early 90s, there were so many other drinks that people were getting into, obviously sodas, juices, and just various drinks that milks, need or want in the American household drastically decreased. So Got Milk popped up everywhere instantly, billboards, commercials, even throughout schools. And not only was it just a slogan, but they also endorsed celebrities, athletes, actors, just if you were anybody of notoriety at the time during the 90s, you most likely had a Got Milk ad campaign with your face on a billboard that said Got Milk, and they would all have this white creamy mustache, of milk on their lip, or a commercial, or just a variant of one of these things, right? And some of the most notable people were Shaquille O'Neal, Jessica Alba, Britney Spears, and even Rihanna, right? So why was this started, and how was the government losing money through milk, you might ask? Well, we got to go back in time some, and we always have to go back to this point of history for whatever reason. It seems like literally the one point of history that I wouldn't say necessarily issues, but everything kind of stems from. So we're going to go back to World War II. So it's 1941. All right. And the government at the time was buying milk from local dairy farmers. Milk in its actual milk form, powdered milk, cheeses, just any variety of dairy that you could think of, the government was buying. All right. And they were buying so much of it and keeping it and giving it to the troops overseas that they turned it also into like a war campaign almost. So because they were responsible for essentially distributing it, they started pushing it on the civilian population as well. And with the kind of motto, the more milk you buy, the more you're helping the war effort. So, the American people were buying milk ultimately to drink it, yes, but also because they were told that they're helping the boys overseas, fight the German scourge, Nazism, World War II, right? Well, fast forward a little bit, right? The war ends, and the government had told dairy farmers to buy more cows. They were like, this is going to go on forever. I wouldn't say forever, but for a very, for probably a few more years at least. So keep buying more cows, make more dairy. We'll buy it from you. Well, the war ends, as most wars do. It ends. And all of a sudden, the government and dairy farmers were in a weird spot. They had a surplus of dairy. Just they had it, and they couldn't offload it fast enough. So the government starts like thinking to themselves like, how do we kind of get rid of this? How do we start pushing milk onto people? So to combat the surplus, the government came out with a few programs and policies, as the government does, because overall they're going to try to bail themselves out. This wasn't really about the milk farmers. It was ultimately about the government, right? So it starts off in 1940, right? And it's funny because obviously this is even before like we really started purchasing and pushing milk onto the troops. But in 1940, they created the federal milk program for schools. All right. So what this means is that milk was subsidized and or free for students who couldn't afford it. So for myself, I came from a low income household, and this even was, a thing when I was in school. Food, milk, things like that, where other people might pay $1 for it. My mom only had to pay 50 cents, or depending on her job or, how much income she made at the time, it could possibly be free. So, it was helpful, right? Then the other policy that they created was the National School Lunch Act, which started in 1946. So now we're out of the war. They start something else where they're like, we need to push milk more and dairy. So they made it mandatory that every school lunch was provided with a carton of whole milk. So they're like, it's going to be in your face regardless. Like, you want it or not, you're getting it. Like, we're pushing milk. All right. And then the third one was the Milk Price Support Program, and that started in 1949. And what this did was it guaranteed a minimum price for milk and allowed the USDA to purchase surplus milk when prices fell below the support level. So they would purchase the milk to kind of subsidize that loss of revenue, right? Which really isn't helping anyone. So these programs aim to artificially stimulate demand and stabilize the market for dairy farmers, which again sounds great because the government's there to help you, right? So they still have a surplus though. All these people, both entities have a surplus, right? They can't offload the milk fast enough. And I want to just take a moment here and say, I know that this is like such a silly video, but like I said, I don't really care. I'm going to talk about it, but it blows my mind how there's always an underlying reason why, the government does something, right? And they give you, we're doing it to help here, but they're really pulling the wool over your eyes so they can help themselves. So ultimately, we continue, right? So now it's 1992 and farmers start to notice a decrease in milk purchases. And one big reason was because of all the other drinks available. Like, I don't know many people personally outside of crazy people who will go to a gas station or go to a restaurant or whatever the case may be and just buy a glass of milk and walk around or sit at a table and drink it. But if you think back to like old movies and stuff like that, people were buying milk in these movies instead of like a beer or, a soda. They'd be like, I want a glass of milk. And they would just sit there and drink it. Like it was so deeply embedded to offload milk that it even like appeared in our cinema. So they realized, because everybody's drinking everything else, and that their milk consumption decreased, like I said, drastically. Because in the 80s, it was recorded, like in California, that the average household was buying about 29 gallons a year of milk. And then fast forward to like 1992, that decreased to about 23 gallons, which roughly equates to 3 to 4% decrease, which translates, for those of you listening, to a 3 to 4% decrease in revenue. All right. So now we're really getting into it. We're really getting into how this is affecting the government and the money, right? So 1992, one other big thing kind of happened, and it seems oddly convenient. In 1992, the official food pyramid came out. And you can't make this up, right? We're literally taking a ladder and we're just climbing this ladder. We're taking these steps into how everything's put in place. Like, and we don't even realize it 90% of the time, right? Obviously, when the campaign came out, I was very, very young, so I didn't realize it. But doing the research on the topic, I start to see it. 1992, the food pyramid comes out, and wouldn't you know it, it lists dairy as one of the major food groups that is needed for a healthy and sustainable life. All right, a healthy and sustainable life. Geez, tongue-tied much, right? So due to this decrease and surplus of milk, a plan was created in 1993. And the California Milk Processor Board, or the CMPB, right? They threw $25 million at the problem, and they enlisted the help of an ad agency, which that ad agency is Goodbye Silverstein and Partners. And they created the Got Milk campaign. And overnight, no matter where you looked, there it was. Got milk. Got milk, got milk, got milk. These stupid white mustaches and these commercials just like really throwing, just this obscure view on milk, right? So these ads were very misleading, all right, to say the least. So they would give you kind of like a half truth, like most of the time, right? So one of the big things that they kind of pushed was that milk kind of like made your bones stronger, right? Milk makes your bones stronger, which in a relative way, it does. It provides calcium and things like that, but they would make it where like if you don't drink milk, like you're gonna turn into dust.
Drink your milk, kids.
I don't want milk. Milk's for babies.
Yeah, babies.
Oh yeah? Well, I happen to know that milk helps build strong bones. So drink up.
Well, Mr. Miller told me he never drinks milk. Look at him.
Yeah.
Hi, kid.
Oh, that's not good.
Got milk. Right? And they would kind of make it where it's like milk is this great cure-all for like bone disease, like osteoporosis, which, I don't know, it's been proven that it actually has no effect whatsoever on like overall like bone diseases. So you could be have osteoporosis, or you could be like Mr. Glass from Split or whatever, and he could have drank 50 million gallons of milk and it wouldn't have done anything for him, right? So the other funny thing is drinking too much milk can actually lead to things like bone fractures. Now you might be saying, Hector, how is milk, a source of calcium, which is good for my bones, lead to bone fractures? Well, it's because of the proteins in milk. Now, when an average person drinks the milk or too much milk, there's so much protein that they're ingesting that their body cannot fully absorb the calcium, which ultimately now they're not getting the benefits of calcium, which can actually give you more brittle bones, which is kind of hilarious to me, right? Like they never talked about a healthy level of drinking milk. They just said drink milk, and like I said, it was everywhere. Got milk, just it blows my mind looking at this, right? So now milk is not necessarily bad for you, right? I'm not sitting here trying to slander milk, and I'm not trying to sit here and slander the dairy farmers of the world. The dairy farmers and farmers in general are very important to our social construct. However, you can get just as much, if not more, calcium in your diet by eating stuff like soy, almonds, and even like collard greens. And that's just a few examples, right? So it's just so funny. They never talked about that. It's just so, they just milk. Like that was the thing, milk. All right. So like I said earlier, research has definitively shown that after the age of 2, the the milk consumption, it just drastically decreases in benefits. It just does. You don't need it. You don't need it as much as they were pushing onto you, right? The average person, and I say average, but 19 to 51 years of age, male, female, non-binary, whatever the fuck you want to call yourself, right? You need about 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. Pretty achievable, right? Especially with milk. Wrong. One average glass of milk contains about 300 milligrams of calcium. Cool. But your body can only absorb about 30 to 32% of it. That's if you're drinking a recommended amount, right? So that's about 90 to 96-ish, right? Like percent of your daily intake. You would need to drink on average around 10 glasses of milk per day in order to get that 1,000 milligrams of calcium, which you're not going to get because the protein in it is going to counteract the calcium. Your body's not going to be able to absorb the calcium. So while you're thinking you're helping yourself, but like I said, you're actually hurting yourself. Now you're destroying your bones. Also, fun fact, throw it in there, too much dairy consumption can lead to acne. So if you're sitting here and you have a real pimply face, nothing wrong with that. And I hope it gets better. But if you're consuming a lot of milk or a lot of dairy, that could be a key factor in the reason why you have so much acne. So maybe evaluate the things that you're consuming and putting in your body, i.e. milk, right? Now, the Got Milk campaign was fairly successful at the time, especially in California where it started. You saw an increase of milk consumption. It was almost, like I said, it was almost by fear. Drink milk or turn into dust, right? Now, diving into it a little bit more and kind of circling back to about how this wasn't about health, but money, right? You start to ask yourself, who owned Goodbye Silverstein and Partners, right? Well, it's 1993. They just so happen to also be bought out at the time by a company named Omnicon, which is still around, right? It's huge. And you've probably seen their ads and you probably don't even know it because they've done ads for Starbucks, BMW, Mercedes. Just if you're a high-end company, they've probably done an ad by you, right? And while it is an open trading company, so you can buy shares and stock and whatnot in it, and that's how it stays afloat, it has a few notable investors, which are the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, I say again, BlackRock, and State Street. So just huge investors that are definitely about money. And it just so happened that they hopped on this ad campaign or created this ad campaign, right, during that time. Now, it is noted, like I said, that it was Goodbye Silverstein and Partners who created the ad campaign because they were allowed to stay on once their company was essentially absorbed, bought out, however you want to say it. And with the help of them, they helped create the idea of, Got Milk, right? So also with their success, it led the government to pass the 1996 Farm Bill, which replaced the 1949 Milk Price Support Program, which, if you recall, allowed the USDA to buy the surplus of milk to kind of help, even out prices. Because it allowed the government to stop buying the surplus from the dairy farmers, it saved them billions of dollars. Billions, with a B, billions. Ultimately leading to a more market-oriented approach, which relied on a risk management program for dairy farmers. All right, so now the government's like, hands off, right? And due to this system, it allowed them to kind of sell their own milk to the population, and it allowed the government to step back and not have a direct purchase, right? So money. How do we boosted up these milk farmers? We're kind of, stuck with our hands up in the air saying, oh, I don't know what to do with this surplus. People aren't buying everything, right? So let's create a campaign. Let's release the food pyramid. Now, The food pyramid has changed several times since then. And, you know, a lot of research has come out, you know, discrediting an over drinkage of milk, right? And there, like I've already, you know, talked about, we have found other sources of calcium that are just as good, if not better for you, right? So fast forwarding 2014, the slogan "Got Milk" ends, right? And it's actually replaced with the slogan "Milk Life." Now, I might be the only one. Maybe I just have my head on a rock. I have never seen a campaign or or not, I wouldn't say a campaign, but an ad, a commercial, anything that says "Milk Life" anywhere. I don't see milk advertised the way it was. You don't see it anymore, right? Milk's not dead, but the campaign kind of is, right? And it's kind of funny to note that once the campaign really started to slow down, and up to now, there's been a 20% decrease in milk consumption. So we're kind of back at, you know, square one. However, you would think, right, before we only had about a 3 to 4% decrease. Now we have a 20% decrease. Oops. And we hopped in, started creating all these things, these ad campaigns, right? Why not now? 20% is substantially larger than 3 to 4%. Why don't we hop in? Oh, I don't know. Because there's no reason to. Because nobody is losing money that quote unquote matters. Now it's dairy farmers and things like that. It's us being affected, not the government. If the government still bought milk and they had a surplus, oh, there would definitely be the Got Milk campaign would have never ended ever. And I personally believe that it would have never ended. It's just crazy, right? So milk, right? Got milk, don't got milk, drink milk, allergic to milk, doesn't matter. Drink it, don't drink it. Just do me a favor. Don't believe everything you see and read. All right. I know we've talked about this in other videos, but don't just believe everything you see and read, right? If companies or organizations or the government can convince you that milk is one of the number one things that you need in your life where you're not going to be healthy or happy, right? What else can they convince you of, right? Just think about that. Just think about it for me, please.